Good morning, everybody. Thank you to those of us who have joined already. This morning for our webinar, we're just going to give it a few more minutes. We've got some more people joining and we will kick off at 10 o'clock. I think we're ready to go. So hello again to those of you who have just joined. Thank you very much for joining us this morning on our webinar from Nice to Have to Business Essentials, Why Cybersecurity Matters to Every Business. I'm Louise Mara, I'm Head of Marketing at CAE. I'll be your facilitator today on the webinar. Just a few small housekeeping points before we begin. We will be sending out the recording of the webinar afterwards to all of the delegates and attendees who have joined. There is a Q&A window which will be available to you. Please do pop your questions in there and we will answer those. We've got allocated time at the end for a full Q&A session with our speakers today. I'd like to just introduce the webinar to you and just give you a quick overview of what we're going to cover this morning. So today's webinar is really going to be for you an overview of the current cybercrime landscape. We're going to be offering you some practical guidance from our CAE security experts, Gisley and Anthony, who I'll introduce to you in a moment. And we'll be giving you some guidance and practical tips on how to build a cybersecurity preparation plan. So today's session, Anthony and Gisley will be talking about why cybersecurity is so important, why businesses of all sizes are now subjected to cyber attacks and how you can look to avoid those, why cybercrime is on the increase, the advancing methods of cyber attacks and what you should be aware of and how to monitor for those, and a 5-step guideline to help you prepare for a cybersecurity plan for your business. And for those of you who may have seen some of our communication which has come out, this is the first of a 3-part webinar series that we are hosting at CAE focused on security and what we like to frame as helping you create more good days within your security team. So within the series of these webinars, we'll be looking to help you break down IT security into manageable chunks, taking you through 3 separate pillars and content streams which are aligned to how we'll help you prepare for anything, which is today's webinar, how we'll help you protect with confidence once you've moved through the preparation phase, and then how we'll help you respond and recover moving through into the final phase. Each of our 3-part webinars are accompanied by an ebook which goes into further detail, sets out some specific action steps and plans and preparation steps for you, and gives you further guidance and instruction. You can download those ebooks. The first one is available now to complement today's webinar. You can scan the QR code on the screen. We'll also be sharing the link to download that through the session today. You can register for parts 2 and 3 of our webinar series, which will complement today's by scanning the QR codes on the screen now. And with that, I'd like to introduce you to our speakers for today. We have Anthony Owen, our Security Solutions Specialist, and Gisley Helgeson, who is our Network and Security Technologist. I'll be handing over to Anthony, who's going to start, to Gisley, sorry, who's going to start today, and then we'll move through, and Anthony will take you through the specific preparation steps for the webinar. So with that, I will hand over to Gisley, and he can get started.
Morning, everyone. I'm just seeing if I can get control of the slides. No, it seems not. So, Anthony, if you could give me the next slide, please.
Sorry, so you should have it now, Gisley. Might take a second.
There we go.
You got it?
Technology. Those of being live. So moving on to the next slide. So I'm just going to give you a brief overview of who we are. So CAE is a trusted technology partner. I know it's a bit of a cliche, but we aim to be a trusted advisor. We've been doing network infrastructure, security, and related services for over 30 years now. So the way we like to work with our customers is to have a collaborative approach. You know, there's no point us designing the perfect network if it's not the right network for you. We work with some of the best partners out there. We partner primarily with Cisco, with Microsoft, and with Dell. But where we really like to add value is through the innovation we bring to the table. So we have CA Labs, or Powered by CA Labs, which is our brand. And the reason we have this is that we don't think it's enough to be a specialist anymore. It's not enough that we understand the vendors and deliver the solutions. We have to add some value to the mix. And that's what we do with CA Labs, where we brought our own intellectual property, our own software, and things that we've developed in-house to add value to the vendors that we work with. So obviously we've had a lot of awards over the years, but in the last Cisco Partner Summit, we won the Cisco Partner of the Year. We also won Security Partner of the Year. Really proud of this one because over the last few years, we've been really working on building our security practice, and Anthony's going to tell you a lot more about that later today. But it's a big part of what we do now. Many of the people on the call will know us as a networking partner, but security is a big part of what we're doing moving forward. Software Partner of the Year, again, was really important to us because 40% of what Cisco do now, for example, is software. So the world's not all about hardware anymore. We're moving to software as a service. We're moving to licensing. So, you know, showing our skills and expertise in this area was really important, as well as obviously Public Sector Partner of the Year. Again, third time running. So again, really proud of that one. So onto the technology, kind of moving from the bottom of the stack, we provide connectivity. So this could be typically SD-WAN these days. It could be direct internet access with local security, with local breakout, which tends to be a requirement for, you know, Microsoft and Office 365, for example. In the workplace, we have solutions around collaboration, managed desktops, VDI, and those kind of solutions. And data center is still there, it's still present. Obviously, a lot of our customers are moving to the cloud. Most of them have now largely moved to the cloud, but they are now still evaluating. There are still applications that need to be run on-prem, either for cost reasons, security, or, you know, data sovereignty and things like that. So not everything can go to the cloud. So there is always going to be a level of on-prem data center mix in there. Networking obviously is our core business, is what we've been doing for the last 30 years. We have loads of experience and expertise. And for the last few years, security has really been a growing part of our business, and we're focusing on that today. We have a strong cloud offering as well, and that does extend into multi-cloud. So, you know, we can provide the connectivity and security across multiple cloud vendors. So, for example, having a single security policy across multiple clouds is something we can briefly touch on today. But all of this is powered by CA Labs, and this is really important to us. And on the next slide, we'll kind of explore this a bit. So what does this mean? It means that we have developed software and solutions and managed services that wrap around them to allow us to do things better. So an example would be to deploy thousands of devices to sites with minimal configuration, or in many cases, no configuration. So this means that we can do it faster. We can make sure there's no mistake. We can make sure that it's entirely repeatable. And the level of engineer that needs to go to site does not now have to be an expert. They can be someone who can do cabling and plug in devices, because everything will register to the cloud, downloads the configuration, and through our tools, all that configuration will have been done ahead of time. So that's an example of what we do there. We've also tied this into our managed services, and we use this to effectively make our managed services more efficient. It reduces cost, and across the board, it's there to add value where the vendors haven't got specific solutions. So we're filling in the cracks in the vendor solution to deliver a holistic end-to-end approach. Now, security is more than just a routine. I mean, we'll offer you to download some research that we did recently, but it's really important that we help our customers have more good days, and that's kind of the theme of the marketing campaign we're running around this. And here is an example of how things might not be having a good day. This is maybe an exaggerated slide, but it's good to illustrate the number of vendors out there for security specifically. There is a lot of logos on this slide. This is very complicated. Choosing the right vendor partner solution out of all of this is not a small task. And there are a lot of different categories. So what we've done is we've looked at how we can help our customers take a simplified approach to this. We have a reference design for an end-to-end strategy, which we present like this, which is a significantly simpler approach. It is focused around zero trust architecture, which we believe everybody's somewhere on the path of trying to achieve that. It's obviously a very hard to reach goal, one that never stops really, but even then it's something that we want to define. So for us, zero trust is identity, it's knowing who you are, it's compliance, which is the device you're using safe to connect to the network, and least privilege access, which means we're only going to give you access to what you need to get your job done. So that for us is zero trust. And then we use the things below to roll out that architecture. So this is your networks and locations. So this is where we focus on firewalls, we focus on segmentation, we want to do authentication, .1x, and make sure that we know what's connected to your network and we've put it into the right network segment. Most of our customers are now moving on to SD-WAN, but along with that, we have SASE. So this is adding the security to the SD-WAN, and we typically see these come together, or at least as different phases of similar projects. And the SD-WAN is obviously there to provide the connectivity between your sites, and the SASE solutions are to make sure that when you connect to the internet, you can do so in a safe way. But it also ties to the endpoint, because obviously we're not sitting in our offices much these days. I'm presenting from home, for example. So we need to have the same level of internet security when we're in the office and when we're working from home remotely anywhere. So this ties into the endpoint. And on the endpoint, we need to also think about endpoint protection software. So we need to move beyond just antivirus. We need more than that. But we need to think about authentication, multi-factor authentication, and we need to think about how do we make sure that that is done with as little friction as possible while still remaining secure, because obviously there are known vulnerabilities with MFA which can be bypassed through social engineering and hacking. So we need to kind of take a risk-based approach to MFA. We also need to cover off email. We need to think about how we tie all this together and how we manage it all. And then in the far right-hand side, we have the workload application and data security. And this is where we're looking at data center firewalls or possibly sort of next generation solutions that start to take a holistic approach to securing your workloads, regardless of whether they are, whether it's, software as a service, whether it's a container, infrastructure as a service, or on-prem. And finally, we bring all of this into the security operation toolset. This is where we need to think about XDR and MDR. One key thing just to note, so obviously XDR is if you want to do it yourself, MDR is if you want to outsource it and for example, have CA take care of it for you. But either way, it's basically looking at how am I managing my incidents and how am I responding to them. So we need to detect things and we need to respond to them, and we need to do it really, really quickly. The average detection rate in the market is well over 200 days. So that means that somebody can be on your network for over 200 days without you knowing about it. So using XDR, we can bring that down to hours or minutes. The next phase is automation orchestration. So we just can't get enough people to do everything we need to do. They're just not out there. So we have to make sure we're using the people we have in the best way possible. And the best way for us to do that is to use automation. Incident response is absolutely critical as well, because at some point, no matter what we do, there is always the possibility that something bad is going to happen. And there is no silver bullet. There is no fail-safe security solution out there. So we need that insurance policy. And this is typically done with a retainer where you have the opportunity to get a specialist in with a very short SLA, typically sort of 4 hours, and they will help you deal with the incident. If you don't have an incident, because it's a retainer-based solution, you would then be able to use that time to do some proactive desk-based training, testing, and sort of looking at your strategy and security policies. Analytics is important because obviously we can't have endpoints everywhere. We can't have firewalls everywhere. We have to be able to look at, things like flow data coming out of the clouds. We need to be able to look at net flow, and we need to be able to analyze this and try and work out what's going on. So it kind of gives us visibility in between all the devices we can manage. So it's great for spotting issues with IoT and things like that. And vulnerability management is important as well, because we've kind of reached the stage, I think everybody would agree, we can't patch everything all the time. It's just not possible. There are too many patches, there are too many devices, and not everything has a nice management platform. Yeah, some IoT is really hard to patch. So we need to be able to say, out of the 100,000 vulnerabilities we may have found on the last scan, how many actually need to be patched today? Which ones are being actively exploited? Which ones are actually a risk to a business? So moving away from impact into actual business risk. So it's really important we factor this in. And then the final piece we have is the cyber recovery, and this is immutable backups, being able to actually recover should the worst happen. Now we've tied all of this in with Talos Threat Intelligence, and the reason we put their name on there is that we believe they are the best threat intelligence source out there. They are by far the biggest. In the private space, the only people who would be anywhere near them would be some government or secret agencies, which we can name. So with all of this, we feel we've got a nice, easy to consume end-to-end strategy to deliver zero trust architectures, and Anthony's going to cover off these in a bit more detail later on. So as I said, we've got a report. There's a QR code here, but I'm sure Luis will put a link into the chat as well at some point. Really, really good. This is developed by CAE, so we had an independent third party go out and do the research for us. Some really interesting stuff coming out of this. For example, 1 in 4 IT professionals always have a bad day at work. That is a very, very high number, and we want to see what we can do to help reduce that. And one of the things I really liked, one of the stats I really liked from the report is 71% of respondents agreed that there are more issues surrounding IT security than they've ever experienced before. Now, I find this interesting because obviously a lot of the things we're doing now are, in theory, simpler. We have SASE solutions that are typically much simpler to maintain than the complex firewalls we used to have, or we have cloud solutions where it's really easy to spin up new machines and put security on them. But I guess the flip side of that is that there are now so many of these systems. We are running our software and services all over the place, whereas we used to have it all in a single data center or 2 data centers. We now have effectively got our IT everywhere. So it's kind of simpler on one side, but now we have more of it. So it's an interesting stat and one that stood out for me. And on that note, I'm going to hand over to Anthony to cover the next part of the slides.
Cool, thank you. Yes, I got control. It's coming. Right. I've not quite got control yet. I can't click through the slides. Bear with me. There we go. Should have it now. There we go. Cool. Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Gisli. That's great. Hello, everybody. Just to kind of quickly introduce myself, Anthony Owen. I'm part of the pre-sales team here at CAE, and my responsibility basically is I sit down with our customers and try and then take them on that journey towards that end-to-end zero trust architecture that Gisli's just been describing. So why is security such a minefield, and kind of what's changed now? I'm sure the first point really is that slide that Gisli had up on the screen before. the security architecture options out there for businesses is absolutely massive. There's a huge amount of different areas to cover. We want full visibility enforcement across the entire infrastructure, really, and the amount of vendors and solutions and licensing models and capabilities, it's absolutely massive. So it's that kind of question of, well, where do I start? I've been having these kind of strategy discussions with customers for probably about 7 years now, and there's been a massive shift in how those conversations have happened. I think, give it 5 years ago, the kind of general consensus was that security was an absolute requirement for kind of larger enterprise, but for more medium-sized business, it was a nice to have. The normal way of working for most organizations tended to be everybody was sat in the office space. Internet access was kind of via one centralized breakout or data center, and you've had a firewall there to kind of limit the outbound traffic and block anything from coming in. Obviously, then COVID happened. I'm sure everybody's aware there was a really quick shift into having to stand up remote working solutions, which weren't necessarily implemented in the most secure fashion. Unfortunately, it was a necessity to do it quickly rather than right for some customers. And we want to put the steps in place now to give that full kind of end-to-end visibility and control. The threat landscape has changed with everybody working remotely. Obviously, people working on a home broadband, they're not sat behind a corporate firewall necessarily. They might be having direct internet access to cloud applications and to the web. So that's and they can be using their own devices as well. So that can introduce some issues. And it's no longer a case of the large enterprises are the targets. I can absolutely guarantee that, yes, you get the high profile ones in the media, but there's also daily hundreds and thousands globally of small and medium businesses that are being targeted. Ransomware is an absolutely kind of stereotypical one, phishing campaigns through email that literally just get fired out to kind of mass address books to hope that one user clicks on that potentially malicious link, downloads a piece of ransomware, and the organizations, these threat actors sat behind it, they're not necessarily concerned about who the organization is that they're targeting. They just want anybody to click on that link, because at the end of the day, their end goal is to encrypt your files and then charge X amount of money or Bitcoin for the decryption key. This is predominantly going to be organized crime, and you do get government kind of actors as well. I know there's been a case recently of Russia and Iranian threat actors targeting NHS and local government to try and disrupt their services as well. So, it's by no means one industry, a specific size of organization. It's absolutely everybody nowadays. And the problem we have is that large enterprises quite often have their own in-house security operations team. They've got dedicated threat hunters, they've got a SIEM platform for log aggregation, and they have their own SOC analysts. But when you get to kind of medium-sized organizations, I'd say probably from around the 1,000 user mark down, typically the IT team wear multiple hats. And what I tend to find is I go into these customers and I say, okay, well, what does your existing security estate look like? And they go, well, I've got a multitude of different vendors in place. I had one customer that had 3 different firewall vendors across their estate, and they're a team of about 7 people. So they're not going to be able to be skilled enough on each of those vendors to the depth that they want to actually understand. Well, 24/7 monitoring for a start, they're not going to be big enough to be able to 24/7 taking in those logs and understand what those logs are telling them. They're not going to have the sheer time to carry out active threat hunting and understand, are they being targeted? Is there anything they need to action? What do they need to change? And like I've got there, common customer questions are, am I a target? Yes, absolutely. Doesn't matter what size you are. How do you monitor everything? We'll kind of cover into that. How do we hunt for threats? You need the capabilities to do this. How do you respond to a breach? Because it can happen to absolutely anybody. How do I recover, and how do you learn from the mistakes? Now, the recommendation for that is break it down, like I say, down to the areas that we mentioned here with Gisley. What you want to do is map to kind of capabilities. I'm going to jump into that a little bit more, but what we want to avoid is just they're kind of going for what's popular, really. There has tended to be a little bit of an attitude towards, well, what I've got is enough. Is that the approach you want to take to security? Just to have enough? It's kind of a bit of a tick box exercise, which I think can be quite dangerous, because what you can end up finding is, if you tick the box of yes, I've got an EDR, I've got a next gen firewall, what you can find is you actually just end up with some ticks in boxes, but you can end up with huge kind of capability overlap. But then if you've not broken down these different areas into the capabilities you need, you could have massive gaps. And what we want to avoid as well is kind of putting together a solution that is perfect for that point in time. But what's the direction of travel for the business? Is there going to be an increased migration away from kind of private data center into public cloud? Are you going to have an increase in remote working? Are you going to have an increase in branch sites, for example? What we want to put together is a capabilities and solutions that can scale to meet what the board are going to want to achieve in the next kind of 5 years. So the way we do that is this 5-step plan. Now, the first point of that is, I always say to customers, and ahead of kind of these workshops I run with them, is document everything you've got at the moment. Now, that's not just a case of going, I have an EDR. What can that EDR actually provide for you? What are the capabilities? Can it do disk encryption? Can it tie down USB ports on a device, for example? Will it give you device trajectory, file trajectory? Does it do real-time analysis of the behavior of files on your devices? Because not each EDR is the same as the next one. You've got the efficacy, the quality of the threat intelligence. Obviously, Gisley's mentioned Talos, but a lot of different organizations have different kind of threat intelligence feeds. You need to understand the capabilities of where you are, because once you've got that, we can analyze, okay, where are the gaps? And then that kind of takes me on to the next point, really, is once we've got these capabilities, you need to understand also, when do they run out? We need to map in what's going to be up for renewal when, so we can plan ahead, and we can start looking at, okay, well, if I want to move to a potentially different vendor, different solution, you need to be planning in an adequate amount of time to run a proof of value and a proof of concept, make sure it provides everything you need it to, and it's not going to cause any kind of user disruption and anything you might need to plan around. Okay. The other thing to factor in is end of life status. In the security world, if anything's gone beyond end of support, it's not going to be receiving updates. It's not going to be receiving vulnerability patching. It's an absolute no-no. So I know historically customers tend to think, mainly on the infrastructure side, a switch, for example, well, is it the end of the world if it goes beyond end of support status? It still works. Security appliances and solutions, you absolutely do not want to have anything that's end of life for support, because you're just going to introduce a whole world of hurt there. So once we understand all this, we can move on to the next point, which is mapping the capabilities to that zero trust architectural approach. Okay, I gave the example there of an endpoint with an EDR. Another example would be the network and locations point. So, okay, well, within our physical networking infrastructure, what do we want from a capabilities perspective? Now, I map these out against capabilities that aren't necessarily tied to any individual framework, but I map them to capabilities that I know are proven across our customer base to provide the best time to remediation, the best time to respond and best time to remediation. So it's actually identifying any potential event, understanding, how that's happened and how it's spread, and remediating that problem. Okay, so if I give the example of networks and locations, we typically start at the identity side of things. Okay, so we want to carry out posturing and profiling of anything connected into the infrastructure, understanding who the user is, what the device is it up to date with AV? Are the operating systems in use up to date? Are the browsers that are in use up to date? or do we want to deny access to specific browsers, for example? If somebody's using a Tor browser, we would want to, block that from our network. We would then put segmentation in place to say, okay, users in a specific group, such as accounts or execs, can communicate with, other groups X, Y, and Z. Or we may say, okay, HVAC systems or CCTV, we want to limit any potential kind of east-west migration of a threat from a supply chain attack. So we'd say, okay, CCTV systems, the management company need remote access, but we'll put a downloadable ACL on that device to say when it connects, it has that ACL enforced to say it can have outbound web access. It can be, monitored from an individual IP address for, a monitoring terminal on site, but anything else is blocked. Okay, that would be the kind of the first step. Next step, we'd say, okay, visibility side of things. We want to understand what the normal kind of behavior is for the different clients that connect to our infrastructure. We can look at net flow, S flow, various types of kind of traffic. And we want to look at the encrypted side of things as well. Kind of around 80+%, and it's always growing, of traffic is now encrypted. So we want to make sure we get visibility of that as well. We want to understand the normal behavior, because if we don't understand the normal, how do we understand what's not normal? And then we kind of move on to next gen firewall capabilities. Now, times have changed. We no longer just look at ports and protocols and block based on IPs, for example. We want to do kind of deep packet inspection now and understand exactly what's contained within those packets. We want application visibility and control. We would want to do encrypted traffic visibility again. There's a multitude of different things that we want from next gen firewall, but again, they're not all the same. So is it a case of the existing firewalls you have in place excuse me, meet all those capabilities? Do they meet half of those capabilities, or only some? It might be a case, or the existing firewall you have in place meets 60%, but actually with a change in licensing, we could do a licensing uplift, and actually we could get you to 100% of the capabilities you'd want, and you don't have to invest in new hardware, because that's still, in life, it's still in support. You just need a slight change of licensing structure. What I'd also suggest as well is we need to look at, once we've identified the gaps, what can we actually do around integration as well? Because if we've got a small stretched IT team, yes, we can do the kind of the MDR capability side of things, but how can we simplify things and have native integration between these products that says, okay, if product one sees a potential threat, without any user intervention, it'll automatically talk to one of the other products and provide some kind of remediation. It can quarantine a host, for example, and raise a ticket in your ticketing system and alert the right people. Okay, so that's kind of the big bulk of what I do with our customer base, is understanding the capabilities, where the gaps are, and we can look at how to plug them. Okay, the next step is plan for the worst. Understand what your existing capabilities are in-house, and like Gisli said, you've got the XDR kind of capability of if you want to have an in-house team kind of respond to those threats, you can have the MDR side of things if you want to partner with somebody to do that. But have a playbook, understand if the worst happens, who is responsible for what. We quarantine a host, who carries out threat investigations, who carries out kind of active threat hunting, who updates policies, etc., etc. Can you continue to operate as an organization? What are your business continuity plans? You need to understand how you action that in-house. But if you're not a large enterprise, chances are that there's going to be other parties involved in that. So you need it documented as to who is responsible for which element, which actually kind of leads me on to the next step as well, is practice. You do fire drills and evacuations. Treat security in exactly the same way. Practice, a potential breach. You can partner with organisations, and I know Gisli mentioned the kind of Talos incident response thing earlier on. You can, as part of that relationship, you can actually have simulations, so they can act as a red team that will actively probe your infrastructure and kind of carry out almost like penetration testing, but they run playbooks that are mapped to kind of real world threats. Okay, so you want to do a readiness assessment. You want to understand. Well, you want to document your incident response playbooks, and you want to test them, make sure that everybody's sure of what their responsibilities are, because if there are any potential flaws in that playbook, you're going to want to highlight it under a practice environment rather than real world. And exactly the same way as you'd run a fire drill. If it's not right, you run it again a few weeks later to make sure that lessons have been learned and it's improved. Okay, which again leads me on to the last point. Security and the threat landscape is not static. It is always changing. There are always new threats. There are always new techniques that are being used, to try and make way into your infrastructure. So this security strategy document and kind of report that I put together for customers, it's always up for evaluation. Now, I know I said at the start, we want to kind of map to the business plans for the next 5 years. It's very rare that those plans wouldn't change. Different things happen with the economy. There can be acquisitions, there can be change in direction from the board, which may mean that, plans change for cloud. A classic one is cloud adoption. Day one, it's we want to stay in our private data center. 18 months down the line, there's a skyrocket in those data center fees and decisions made. Okay, we're going to migrate to Azure or AWS. We can adopt and kind of change the plan within that strategy guide to make sure we can put the kind of play in place to provide that zero trust kind of architecture into the cloud environment as well. So yeah, it's about making sure that the risks are always highlighted, understood, and the measures are put in place to mitigate those. So I think that's it from me. What I would say is, if you're interested in booking in one of these kind of capability workshops, obviously we've got the QR code there that you can scan to register for one of those. And I know, obviously, we said at the start, the slides are going to be sent out for this afterwards as well. But what I would say is, absolutely book in for one, even if it's just to understand where you are now. If you know that there's going to be kind of plans of business change and any kind of specific projects that your security is going to play a factor in, and I can guarantee, because security is involved in everything nowadays, by all means, just book in. We can have a discussion. And what I'd say is really, really helpful is, if ahead of that session, do that kind of first stage. Document your entire security estate, what the capabilities you have in place for it are, and when any of those kind of end of life dates or contract dates are up, we can bring that and we can sit down, map those capabilities, and we can quickly identify where the potential gaps are and what we need to plug. So I think that should be us on to the Q&A. Louise, have you got anything you want to add? Gisley, anything you want to add there?
Nothing to add, Anthony. I don't know if you can see the questions in the Q&A panel. We've got 2 in there. I can read them out to you if that's not appearing for you.
I can't, because I'm presenting, unfortunately.
Okay, no problem. So we've had one question in here. How long does a workshop normally take?
Workshop, they can vary. In all honesty, I would normally book in at least 4 hours. To be totally honest, it's one that it can be a bit of a rabbit hole of security conversation. So I'd normally plan for at least a half day. I've got no objections to if you want to book the whole day, absolutely fine. I can do them remote. I can come to you, either or. But I'd say you want to be looking at least a half day slot.
Brilliant, thank you. And then we've got another question in here. In terms of practicing out your incident responses, is it worth introducing an actual threat in a controlled manner so you can test your capabilities?
Yes. It's a very difficult one, in all honesty. You need to be very, very careful. I personally would leave the kind of the threat simulation side of things, I would leave to specialists, because if you really need to understand what you're introducing to your environment before you carry out something like that. Because if you're introducing something that could potentially be malicious, do you understand effectively the back end code of that threat enough to make sure that it's not going to propagate throughout the rest of your infrastructure? If it does, and if it causes any potential user interruption, there's going to be some very angry phone calls. So what I would do is I'd suggest leave it to kind of specialist organizations that they can simulate real world threats, but they can often do it with kind of benign payloads that would act in a similar fashion, but not actually execute anything malicious.
Thank you, Anthony. In terms of the person who asked that question, if there's anything further that you want to know on that, please either drop it into the chat or we can follow up with you afterwards with Anthony and Gisley. Has anybody got any more questions at all? There's nothing new being put into the Q&A window, so I think that looks like that's all we've got so far. Okay. Gisley, is there anything that you wanted to add at all into those two responses?
No, I think maybe one thing to add would be, we are definitely seeing a trend towards reduction in vendors. People are generally getting fed up with the lack of integration between different products, so again, this is why I've said a few times, moving away from best of breed point products to architectures, security architectures, taking a slightly more holistic view. I mean, Gartner is more or less preaching the same message. So yeah, I mean, it'd be interesting to hear feedback from the people on the call, really. If this resonates with you, are you also looking to reduce the number of security tools and consolidate vendors? I mean, we're not saying you could pick one vendor, obviously, nobody's going to cover everything, but you can probably go from, in some cases, many of our customers have, over 20 vendors. Often we can take that down to 3, 4, 5, maybe, depending on the environment. Be interesting to get feedback if anybody wants to pipe up and kind of make a statement there.
There's probably a few people sat there now going, oh God, yeah, actually it's a good 10, 15, rattling them all off.
There's nothing new coming in, so we'll hold those for some follow-up sessions potentially. Off the back of this, maybe when we send out the recordings and the slides to people, it may prompt some more thoughts and input and questions. Want to just flip through onto the next slide there for me, Anthony, please. Yep. Let's just get those QR codes back up again. Thank you. So just to close out, everybody on the call again. Oh, just before I do, sorry, we've just had one more question come in. Let me just pop that through for you, Anthony. We've seen benefits in having an integrated ecosystem, both from a technology point of view and commercial. Courtesy of CAE, I might add. Okay, not a question. More of a lovely statement. Thank you very much. Good to hear. Okay. Perfect. All right. Let's just. I think if there's no more to add in, we'll close out. We'll give some people some time back of their day. So we've just put up just the QR codes for you, just in case you missed them at the end. As we mentioned at the beginning, today is part 1 of a 3-part series on security, specifically focused around security, that we're running at CAE. So today's webinar recording will be sent out to you. We also have an ebook which complements the webinar. You can download that on screen now with the QR code. We'll also send you a link for that. And if you did want to register for parts 2 and 3 of the webinars to continue to hear from Anthony and Gisley and some more people within our security team, then please do register for those. Details are on screen now. And if there are no more questions or points that anybody wants to raise in there, I think that we can probably close out now and say thank you very much for your time. If you want any further follow-up information from us at all, please don't hesitate to make contact with us. Gisley, Anthony, thank you very much indeed for your time. Thank you for your expertise and sharing your knowledge with us.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Have a good day.